I've been meaning to start a reading vlog for like the longest time, and I think I've decided that I want to do another installment of my nostalgic read series. I've only done one before, and the series is basically just me trying to like reread some of like my favorite books that I absolutely loved when I was younger, and they don't necessarily have like the cultural relevance to like keep up with like publishing being so fast now and indie publishing being so popular as well. Like there's always something new coming out. Some books I do think still maintain cultural relevancy, like Twilight, The Hunger Games. Those are pretty much like always going to be super popular. The books I want to read for the series are books that were really popular, got their like 5 minutes, maybe longer, and just aren't talked about anymore. These are like the type of books that when you see the covers or someone brings up in a conversation, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like I remember that book, like I can't believe I forgot it existed. Those types of books. So the book that I want to read for this vlog is one that is very near and dear to me. I think the author is really touching on some themes in this book that have really kind of turned out to be true in a way, and that is the Uglies series by Scott Westerfeld. I read this book so many times when I was younger. I say so many times, I mean probably like 2 or 3 times. Maybe I read it once after I graduated high school, but man, like this book was like so it to me. This is probably one of my favorite sci-fis growing up. Scott Westerfeld, I've read his other books, also has some really insane concepts that I don't think you see too much of every now and then. If you're unfamiliar with this book, we follow a character named Tally. This book takes place in like a post-apocalyptic world, like a post-nuclear war, like post-oil war type situation, and they live in kind of like a fake utopia. Our main character is Tally, and she's about to turn 16 years old. Pretty much everyone in Tally's world is put into different groups depending on their age. Tally is about to turn 16 years old, and Tally is an ugly. It's much better to understand what an ugly is if you know what happens when you turn 16. In this world, when you turn 16, you turn into a pretty, which is essentially this giant procedure that makes you pretty. It's basically like extreme surgery. So Tally being ugly just means that she hasn't had any surgery. She is like normal. She is like you, and she's like me. And as a pretty, her only job or her only responsibility is to like party and have fun and just be pretty. And it's pretty much sounds perfect, except one of Tally's friends, Shay, runs away before they turn 16, and the authorities in Tally's world are holding her responsible to find her friend and bring her back to her town so they can both turn pretty together. The concept probably sounds super wild and wacky if you've never read this book, but if you read this book, you know how freaking insane this book was. But like, picture yourself reading this before you turn 16 and just like wanting to fit in. This idea of like living in a society that is just telling you be pretty and like don't worry about your life or school, getting a job, that kind of thing. Like, who wouldn't want that, or what teenager wouldn't want that? I guess you can see how well this would have resonated with the core group of audience that it was like marketed to. It is a 4-book series, but I will only be reading this first book for this vlog. Also, if these covers were released today, they'd be called like super ugly, which I can totally understand, but looking back on it now, I'm just gonna call it camp. I know that there were other covers released for the series, but those are like boring. At least these were like funny. Hi, so it's currently like 3:30 in the morning. I'm about like 100 pages into it. I'm like 97 pages into it. At this point, we get like a pretty good solid like foundation of this world. We've been introduced to like most of the major characters and the world and the backstory. So right off the bat, we meet our main character Tally, and Tally is about to turn 16, and she is pretty much, the first thing that we see her do is like sneak into basically a city that she's not like allowed to be in, like a part of the city that she's not really allowed to be in, and if she gets caught, she would get in trouble. So like right off the bat, like, we know that she likes to take risks. I'm assuming that everyone who's gonna watch this has an idea of what this book is about or has read it before. This vlog will be spoilery. Before you were pretty, you aren't ugly. So from like ages 12 to 15, you're technically an ugly, and what that just means is that you haven't had the pretty surgery. You are like a normal, what we would consider just like a normal everyday person, but everyone in this society is told that if you hadn't have your surgery yet, you are ugly. Like that's your designation. And Tally really wants to be pretty. Everyone wants to be a pretty much all that you have to do when you're pretty is to just like have a good time, like party until you get into your middle pretty age, which is just like being an adult. That's about it. We learn pretty quickly that Tally's best friend Paris, he turned into a pretty like some time ago, so her best friend's out with her and she's just like waiting for the day that she can turn pretty. And then pretty quickly we meet our other main character, Shay. I remember when I first read this book, I thought she was really infuriating because of how like presumptuous she was about like everything. She was that type of person who thinks like who's like really idealist. But we meet Shay and she from the get-go does not have the same viewpoint as like Tally. Like she's not super like eager to turn into a pretty. You might even say that she really wants to stay ugly, but everyone has to go through this surgery, and this surgery is like a step above like your normal plastic surgery. Like your bones get changed, your skin changes. I don't think they'll change like your skin color, even though if you want to you probably can. Like higher cheekbones, fuller lips, larger eyes, that type of thing. It's like a pretty like invasive like type of thing. And this is kind of where you start to see some of the themes that the author Scott Westerfeld is like touching on that is still pretty like relevant, even more so today. Shay pretty much mentions that like everyone who's pretty much looks the same large eyes, the same sized lips, the same high cheekbones. And that really reminded me of how we are still kind of seeing like the Kardashian body, at least here in the United States. Of course things work differently in other like cultures and stuff, but as far as like Western and the United States, we have this idea that women can naturally have like the smallest waist and the largest bottom and the largest breast, when that is like not not everyone's gonna have that body. And I would say that most people won't naturally have Kim Kardashian's proportions, for example. And while I don't think Scott Westerfeld was really talking about like influencer and influencer culture, he was probably just speaking more on like celebrity culture, since that was like, I mean, that's still pretty like prevalent today. For the most part, celebrities have been like the biggest influence on young people before influencer culture. Shay's pretty much really against this idea that like we are told from a young age that these certain body types or these certain aspects of people's bodies, like having small lips or having small eyes or having too close together eyes or having a really big nose or a really small nose, are seen as like ugly, and we're just supposed to kind of accept that. And even like Tally is like really into this. Like she's like, it's biology, like, which is like there's no valid reason for why that is true. That's literally just someone's opinion. But in the society, that's pretty much like what these children have been like forced to believe, and even adults believe this, right? Because they bought into it, and they're all pretties, and middle pretties and older pretties. And obviously like this is like still around to this day. Like you see a photo of like your average like 50-year-old woman and you compare her to like J-Lo, who's also in that similar age range, and everyone's like, how can I look like J-Lo? Well, J-Lo pays thousands of dollars to see a dermatologist and an esthetician and someone to like do her skincare, and she pays like hundreds of dollars for her like her skincare routine, stuff like that. And this also does take place like in the far future. This author pretty much talks mad shit about how our society treats the earth. Like, let me read this paragraph for you. On school trips, the teachers always made the rusties out to be so stupid. You almost couldn't believe people live like this, burning trees to clear land, burning oil for heat and power, setting the atmosphere on fire with their weapons. But in the moonlight, she could imagine people scrambling over flaming cars to escape the crumbling city, panicking in their flight from this untenable pile of metal and stone. Like, he's like obviously very much a critic on how we've been treating our planet. And that's something that I always really liked looking in a lot of my sci-fi books that are set in the far future, how they critique our current situation. And one last thing before I end this clip, one thing that I want to like touch on is like this concept, like this entire what this book deals with, like 16-year-olds being forced to go into like surgery, and they want to go into this like life or physically demanding surgery. Like that is such a weird concept that I don't feel like I see YA doing this a lot anymore, specifically from a fantasy sci-fi perspective. I won't speak on other genres, but I feel like YA in particular has leaned more into like tropes, like the enemies to lovers trope, or like whenever a new book comes out, one of the first things that you hear is this book is a crossover between this film and this video game, and it has the enemies to lovers trope, and it has this trope, and it has this trope, and it has that trope, which is all fine and good. Not that those books can't be good, but like I feel like publishing, again, YA sci-fi fantasy has leaned more into like being referential, which again is not a bad thing, but I kind of do miss like these batshit crazy kind of concepts. I know Scott Westerfeld had another series that maybe I would also do in this video series called like The Midnighters. That's also like a funny kind of concept. Let me go back to reading. So we're at the point of the story where Shay, Tally's new friend, kind of decides that she doesn't want to be a pretty, and she just leaves town. Like she packs her bags and she starts like hitchhiking to go meet some people that she knows like live out there in the wilderness and who've like rejected this version of life. And Tally's like, whatever, girl, like I'm gonna be an ugly, like I'm not gonna be an ugly for the rest of my life. I want to be pretty and like have a good life and party and literally have no worries in the world. So thanks for being my friend, I'll miss you, peace. That's all well and dandy, but the day of Tally's surgery, she meets and essentially like a whole new group of people called the specials or special circumstances, and they're not pretty at all. Like they're kind of pretty, but they look like scary pretties. The way that they describe them as like looking kind of animalistic. They're like, sorry girl, like you can't be a pretty because your friend's gone and a bunch of other people have like escaped under our watch, and it's your responsibility to like go find them. Like you're our last connection, our clue or whatever. And then Tally's like, what the fuck? That's not fair. But they're like, sorry, you will never be pretty unless you go find your friend for us. That's pretty much where we are in the story. When I first read this book, I obviously like I didn't know what was to come. So when I first read it, I remember like hating Shay for like ruining Tally's life. Like I was thinking to myself, like, you know what? Fuck Shay. Like Tally was gonna have a good life. She's gonna be a pretty, like, and now she's ruining it for her. Obviously, you know, the story's gonna progress or whatever. Low key, is being a pretty that bad? Yes, the surgery is weird and it's like invasive, but like the way we look at surgery like in our culture is very different than in their culture. It's like an expected thing. Like it's like graduating high school, you're gonna get surgery, you know what I mean? What else? Also, like the society that they live in, I haven't really talked too much about that. It is like futuristic and stuff. Housing is not an issue. Like there's no such thing as like homelessness. Everyone has an education. Money hasn't really been brought up, so I'm assuming that it's like a non-issue as well. Healthcare, no one seems to ever get sick. I guess like the surgeries take care of that. They seem to be really like eco-conscious considering how they view like the past society of Earth, like us. Like there's this one scene where Tally like drops a mask on the floor and like the floor immediately like sucks it up and like recycles it or something. I don't know how that works. Yeah, like it's like a good society, so I know that like the author will eventually like pose like this is why being pretty is bad, but like when you're first reading it and like in retrospect, is it that bad? Also, I live in Texas. It's getting fucking wild here. So Texas in 2022 versus the Uglies pretty society is, I mean, I don't want to compare, but you know, but yeah, I will update later. So I just got to part 3 of Uglies and we've got some progress. We've gone to the part where Tally has found the society of people that live outside of this pretty world who've rejected this surgery that turns them pretty, and she's of course like really freaked out about this. Like they like hunt animals and they chop down trees and they have to do everything themselves, and that's obviously like not something that she's familiar with because she's been like pampered her whole life. but everyone's like pretty nice, and she does feel like super guilty that she's gonna have to rat them out so she herself can turn pretty. We've gone to the point where Tally realizes why pretty the surgery to turn pretty is much worse than we would assume, which of course there's already some sort of like idea that people are ugly even before like they even have some sort of surgery or anything. Like everyone's just ugly, and that of course like we know that as like that's pretty shitty. Like what is ugly and what is pretty in our society is that like that's up to the eye of the beholder, but in her society everyone's just ugly, and in order to be better you have to have this surgery. However, she also finds out from these older pretties who used to be pretty but now they're actually ugly because they haven't had their like second surgery. A lot of pretties actually have this like head lesion, this like brain lesion, that they have this brain lesion that kind of affects the way they think. They're not very serious about a lot of things, and they essentially don't really have like a lot of critical thinking skills. And you have to remember that the society that Tally lives in is like a huge reaction to the shitty aspects of our own society. So the brain lesions, for example, are so people avoid conflict. Everyone's kind of like blasé about everything, other than like a few people who need like critical thinking skills like doctors and stuff. But for the most part, a majority of pretties have these lesions and they're pretty like whatever about everything. The society that Tally lives in, I'm pretty sure, is like a moneyless society. Everything they need they ask for and it's made for them, and then everything gets recycled and reused, that type of thing. They don't cut down trees, they don't hunt animals. Like it's all very much like catered to perfection as much as it could be. So this is, I guess you can call this like a faux utopia almost. But of course at the same time, like we also want to be individuals and have our own thoughts. So like I really do like this kind of moral grayness that the author is posing, which I feel kind of gets lost in YA sometimes, where the author's like, this character is bad because of XYZ, which is totally fine. But I do like a question posed where it's not so clear cut. And of course Tally's like conflicted about this because her society, like, I mean, compared to ours, like some aspects are better. There's no conflict, there's no issues with housing or money, people don't starve, there's little to no sickness. I think there's like no sickness at all. So it's, that part's great, but obviously like the independence is like called into question. There's also a little bit of a romance as well. Usually when it's a guy writing a romance within like a YA book, usually like I don't have high expectations, and this isn't like amazing or like stunning or anything, but I do think it has, there's nothing wrong with it. I thought there's one sweet moment where Tally looks at this guy that she has a crush on, and she's like, for a moment he looks pretty to me, which I think says something, because for us, if we have a crush on someone, we're attracted to them. But for Tally, everyone's ugly. Like no one's pretty no matter what. But for a moment she feels a certain way about him, so she, for a moment, he looks pretty to her. So that's where I'm at. I will probably not update until I finish the book. Give me your thoughts so far. I'm having a good time rereading this. Like I think this book holds up pretty well in my opinion. So I just finished reading Uglies by Scott Westerfeld. Shit, bless you. Anyways, so I don't know, I think this book really does hold up so well. It's like really fun, and I think the author like gets his message across. If I have to critique one thing before I like wrap up this vlog, is that he writes his action sequences kind of long sometimes. Like instead of saying something along the lines of Tally had to ride her hoverboard and evade the security or the authorities or whatever, he will literally write step by step what Tally has to do in order to evade capture by the authorities. Like he will say she went through the trees, she turned here, had to do a U-turn, avoid the cliff side and go over the river or whatever, which is all fine and dandy, but I'm personally like not the type of reader who like pictures images in my head. Like that's not me. So it's just like a lot of detail and for nothing. So that's just one thing that I have. But overall, like this story's like, I think it's really good. Obviously like I'm biased. I mean I should be biased for like every book that I liked when I was a kid. I mean the last book that I read for the series I did not like, but I had liked it when I was younger. If I had to critique maybe the characters, Tally doesn't, like outside of this situation, I don't know too much about her, if that makes sense. Like I don't really get to know like anything other than like she's kind of very daring, and she'll just do what she feels like she has to, and she's like not afraid to break the rules. I mean, when we first meet her, she's literally breaking the rules. And this book really just makes me want to read like more sci-fi, because I'm very much a fantasy person. I don't know if I'll pick up like the sequel anytime soon, because while this definitely kind of ends on a cliffhanger, it's also kind of like a satisfactory ending. I had a really good time doing this vlog. Let me know if there are any like books that you think I should do for this like nostalgic reads series. I'd also be like up to like doing books that like maybe were like a hit at the time that I didn't get to read but maybe you read. Talk to me in the comments down below. I'd like to hear anything you have to say about what I said in this video. I will link my social medias down below, as well as some far more important links. Feel free to like, dislike, comment, or subscribe, or do neither. It's all cool with me. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.